Eley, I wanted to ask you a question. I'm always fascinated at how portrait photographers get subjects to like do what they want, right? Like that's always the trick. And it's interesting because you're the first person I've heard like where you don't want them to do anything. You want them to be like that first awkward moment. But you know, when you're working with people and you do want a certain look, right? You do want a certain emotion or you're trying to get something, do you have anything like any kind of any kind of process that you use, like find a common denominator, I mean, find a common ground to talk about, kind of ease into it, get them to open up? Do you find yourself struggling with that? Is something that comes natural to you? Do you have any like tricks in that world? What's your go-to on that?
Sure, I would say that for me, I think that is why I'm in the career path that I'm in, because it's not very hard for me to find some type of common thread between myself and somebody else. I don't care what you do, what you look like, who you are. I think that this is a good slide for us to have that conversation, because these are both everyday people. She's a painter, he's an illustrator and a DJ, but they both welcomed me into their space. And that's always a little awkward, I would say, in the beginning for individuals, not necessarily for me, but for like the individuals I'm working with, because they're like, oh, like, how do I look? Oh, what is she gonna think of my space? Why is she in my space? You know what I mean? But for me, I like to, of course, try to encourage them to just be the best self. I'm not a stylist by any means, but I might be like, oh, like that red looks beautiful on you. You know what I mean? Like I'm a little complimentative. Is that a word? Of like what's going on. And I help, arrange things like, oh, well, this might be nice for our photo here. I promise I'll put it back. You know what I mean? Because environmental portraiture is now, of course, like a whole nother layer of portraiture where you're in this environment, this encompassed environment. And so if I can put something on the screen and show them, like I'm a big fan of tethering so that people can see like exactly what's coming through. Then they're able to see like, oh, like I like that angle, or let's change this, or and then it's a collaborative process. Like they're involved with it as well. And so yeah, finding a common thread is a good jump off point. But I mean, I was on set the other day and like beautiful girl, like 24 years old. You can't take a bad picture of her. But we had a whole crew of people standing behind me, and she was like, ooh, you know what I mean? So like, if I have to get on the ground and start barking like a dog, like I'm gonna do it, because at the end of the day, it's like we're creating pictures, we're having fun, like we're creatives, let's have fun. You know what I mean? So I don't mind bringing that energy to set and just like being bubbly. But I also like, I know my buddy Jared Christian's in the audience right now. I'll also like be like, okay, this is the job, we need to execute. You know what I mean? So it just depends on like what's happening in front of me as to like how we can kind of create whatever magnificence is going to come through the lens. I would say that as far as like this kind of studio scenario, to the expansion of environmental, to the expansion of how do I do something with this like as a professional career, that's this where we are right now is a good expression of that, because this is me working with now like a like a quote unquote like person of interest. This is Chris Lee. He's an actor. He's in Hamilton from Chicago and Legacies and a couple other shows. And for me, it was like a matter of like, I love the studio, but I'm bored of the studio now. So now I want to like zoom out. I want to see what your life is. I want to see who you are. I want to like back up a little bit and showcase like line, shape, and form and these components coming together. But here in this expression, these are like 1, 2, 3, 4 photos of like I don't know, like a 10-piece series that we did that was more of an editorial expression of this individual. And for me, I really love this trajectory that I'm headed in, because it's looking at the duality of people. It's looking at like, oh, well, he can be like kind of edgy and like Atlanta like gangster with his cigar and his like red top, but he could also be this like super fun like performer, you know what I mean, like happy and
Yeah.
energetic. So for me to be able to like say this is one side of a person, but they also encompass this, is important to me at this point, because we're dynamic beings, everyone is. And so I think that there's more to us than just one layer.
Yeah, and it's nice when this was for a publication for a client.
This was for him. This is for like his
Okay.
PR, like for his press release information or content that is going to go out, just kind of promoting him and what he's doing, because he's a musician
Yeah.
outside of like what he does in theater and on film.
So it's great when you, like you said, have the opportunity to make several different types of pictures in different settings to really showcase more of who the person is. Like telling a story in one picture is really hard, and sometimes that's all we get with if you're assigned something from a publication or a magazine or a newspaper. You may only get, literally, they might tell you beforehand, like, we're only going to use one picture. When you have a spread, I feel like it just opens up so much more. In a situation like this where you're being hired, there's a purpose for these pictures. They're for him, or they're for the client, whatever. How do you go about still infusing your own creative sensibility, your own like sense of the artist that you are into the work? That's one of our biggest challenges, is how, no one wants to completely sell out and hate what they're doing, so how do you still take the job, please the client, yet make yourself happy and make images that you actually want to put in your portfolio?
So, I mean, every job is different, right, Ray? But I would say, I don't know, maybe I've been blessed a little bit in the fact that people have given me the opportunity to do more or less what I want to do. This is an
Mhm.
example of where he was like, I trust you, I like your vibe, but prove it to me. You know what I mean? And so for my personal process, I love the concept of serendipity and seeing what the light is doing or seeing what the space offers and all of those things coming together. But leading up to it, I also work with a team. You know what I mean? I have stylists, I have
Right.
photo assistants, I have makeup artists and things of that capacity. And to make sure that the crew is all kind of on brand of whatever I'm like thinking in my little pea brain at the moment, I'm a big person of like mood boards. So with these 4 photos, there's a whole like scrolling page of like different things that are like building the way in which I'm thinking about this. Like, okay, like I want to have like
Hmm.
this kind of 70s aesthetic mixed with like hip hop, you know what I mean?
Right.
I want to have like this like bright and vibrant thing mixed with like a little bit of edge. So I'll make sure to be able to show um examples of what it is that I want to do that aren't necessarily these photos, right? Of
Mhm.
something else showing like this is the reference, guys, and then pulling that together and then having that trust, I think, comes from being able to connect with that individual in front of your lens the day of. You know what I mean? Like I had conversations here or
Yeah.
there with Chris leading up to this shoot of like, hey, this is the vibe, here's the mood board, yada yada, whoop de whoop. But really it came into the day of him being open to like receive me and
Mhm.
me being able to say like, I got you. You know what I mean? So there's a little bit of back.
Yeah. I want to move on to the next section. And so this is so it's a constant evolution. You start in the studio, then we get into environmental portraits, and now you're taking your portraiture into the sort of documentary realm, and you're doing street portraiture, right? Tell us about this. Was this pandemic era related? Were you doing this before?
Sure. I mean, both of these specific shots did come out of last year in the midst of the pandemic. And you'll see later on in some of these other photos that like they're more specific to what was happening in the pandemic. And I wanted to be able to record that in my own way. But
Mm.
for me, like, again, it's kind of like looking back at like, okay, this is the commercial entertainment side versus the documentary side. And I find these similarities where it's like, oh, am I looking at color theory? Yeah, sure, maybe a bit. But I'm also trying, I just think that like what I love about my work as I reflect on it is the ability to like make everybody look like a hero. The gentleman on the left was a passerby or vagabond. I guess we could call him homeless. And the person on the right is a celebrity, you know what I mean? And so for me, it's like, how do you honor and respect both souls? Because both people deserve a level of respect and space for whatever is going on in their life. You know what I mean? And so for
Yeah.
both of them to trust me again with my
Mhm.
camera to just say like, hey, like this is what we're doing today. It's a special space, and I want to make sure that I like honor that always. I never want to try to like showcase someone um where they don't look their best.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And just aesthetically, I don't know if there's ever been two more perfectly paired pictures side by side. It's like you said, the color juxtaposition of these is just, it's so awesome. It's really cool how, as you make more and more work as a photographer, you'll go back through and something will pop out and you'll be like, wow, I made another image. And then you can put them together and it just changes everything.
Right.
And you can tell a whole different story. But I love your sort of statement, your story behind these two together. I mean, that in itself is such an awesome, unexpected way of, furthering the story. When you didn't know when you were shooting these individually, right, that
Right.
they would be together or that you would shoot one or the other. But after you did and then put them together, this sort of new story presented itself, and now you're sharing that, and I think that's really a really awesome perspective to hear.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's,
Um,
go ahead.
no, I want to hear what you have to say. You're more important. This is your work. This is your stuff.
I don't know, right? It's already gone. I go a mile a minute. But looking at this slide, I think that's another kind of interesting thing that's come together. These were also created during 2020. You can see
It's a personal project, this stuff?
the one on
Or,
the left is from a personal project where I was like,
okay.
okay, like it's the end of the world. What do we do? And so it's like, I got to document it. So I'm like out on the streets. I mean, I'm sure my parents would hate me for this, but I'm out there like running around, probably like not 6 feet away from people. And thankfully I'm
Yeah.
okay. But, I had my mask on and I had like a little like camera like on and like was like, okay, like I want to talk to these people, because you could see in this moment, like the early pandemic, that like people were concerned, they were scared, they were uncomfortable. And then I met this gentleman on the red backdrop where he was like sitting on a bench and he was like waiting for like his ride to go home. And I noticed that he was like in a security officer thing, but he just seemed like approachable. So I went up to him and I was like, hey, like I'm Eley, this is what I'm doing. You mind if I talk to you for a second? And he was like, sure. And like, I don't know what allowed me to get him to open up, but he just talked to me for a little bit. And I was like, okay, well, tell me about who you are. And he was super excited to have someone ask him that, I think. And he was like, well, this is what I do during the daytime, but at night I'm actually studying to be a nurse so that I can be in there on the front line fighting with this
Wow.
pandemic. You know what I mean? And so I was like, God,
Yeah.
like I have to make your picture. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was like, because you have a mission. And I think that that's so cool because, like outside of his security code, he's just like, another dude passing by that maybe someone wouldn't stop. So to be able to say like, you're of importance in my mind, I want to be able to share that with everybody else. So I was working on the project of like walking around the Atlanta streets and documenting the individuals that I saw that caught my attention in the middle of the pandemic. And I wanted to be able to say like, how can I bring the studio outside with me portably? And that
Okay.
expression of that by being like, let me just wrap this wood in like whatever colored backdrop I'm feeling for the day and go with it. Versus the one on the right was a commissioned assignment. And this wasn't necessarily like they said like, oh, they did not say, I saw this red piece, do this over here for this person. But that's just like where my brain was at the moment of like, this is a moment and this is something that I want to like be able to freeze in time and bring a little more attention to. So if you look at the rest of that like orange series, it's more like traditional like environmental editorial stuff. It was shot for Atlanta Magazine. But before I left, I did my research. I was like, this guy looks like this, and we're going to his backyard. And I think that the orange will pop off of the green kind of thing. So I had that loose concept in my mind. But that was the last shot of the day. Like we did a bunch of beautiful stuff on the docks and whatever else at his home. But I was like, look at where the light is right now. And he just happened, he's deaf. And I don't know, that might not mean anything, but he was like deaf and he was kind of like in his own moment, just like embracing and feeling the sun. And I was like, oh my God, put that orange backdrop behind him right now. You know what I mean? And then like, I was okay, like, hey, like, I didn't take it when he wasn't aware, but I was like, if you could just find that moment again, I thought it was so beautiful. And I'm glad that I asked for that because this is probably one of my favorite photos in my portfolio today. So, again, putting these together, it's just interesting because it's like, here's my personal style or where my brain's at in said moment or time. And then being able to bring that into like what got chosen for a commercial assignment was really cool to, again, have them like trust you. It's like, trust your gut.
Yeah, you said something. I just want to like reiterate. You made a really phenomenal point where you said that when you stopped to talk to the security guard, the guy on the left, that he was surprised and then seemed to be like really excited that you asked about him. um, when you walk around with a camera around your neck or however you carry it, it's this amazing passport where you can just walk into a room, walk into a violent scene, you can walk into wherever, and you feel like you're supposed to be there. You feel a little bit legitimized, but we carry so much of our own ego baggage with us, where we're insecure and we think people are staring at us, or imagine you're shooting in a church and it's really quiet and you're like, I'm gonna make a noise, or these people are gonna think I'm weird if you're walking down the street asking people. But like, a lot of times people are just really, really honored that you would take the time to not only talk to them, but then make their picture. I mean, it's such a, if you approach it with the idea, like you said, where it's just in it's kind of a giving way, you're just as much giving them, a lot of times, not always, this moment of just feeling special. Like, he's just a normal guy. Everyone has their own story, but he's just doing his own thing, but someone asked about him and then asked to take his picture. And that can be a really special, like, connecting moment. And I think that's what allows you and us to make portraits unexpectedly sometimes. You really have to, I find within just me and myself, I have to get over myself a lot of times, like leave that behind and do your job and just open up to people, right?
Yeah.
It's reciprocal. We're gonna keep going because I want to make sure that we see everything.
Sure.
So this is more portraiture. The one on the left, I really like sometimes when the studio, like you said, the studio element is sort of put in an unexpected place, like a sidewalk or something. Like you have this backdrop set up. When you're shooting this, did you know that you were going to shoot it wide and show everything, or did you do both? And why did you choose this one?
This one was like I don't know, I just love photography, like, straight up. And so, like, if I'm bored or the day is slow, I'm like, let's go. You know what I mean? And to be able to bring like my aesthetic of the studio outside has just been something that I've kind of like grown into and understood. And so I started tight and then was like, okay, well, let's zoom out because the kids' basketball is on the side and it has stripes, and so is the sandbag and those little similarities. But also there's like, what, 6 kids, 6 kids in this itty bitty backdrop. And this was a moment where I was like, I'm not going to pose them. One, because I was like, is it okay to take pictures of kids without adults around? Like, I didn't really know. I was just like, I'm just gonna do this real quick and like go. But like looking at it, it was like, I feel like this is such an iconic moment. Like, I hope that these kids find this one day. You know what I mean? Because like, what a frozen moment in time of like who they were at their essence in like the heat of Atlanta. You feel me? And like next to a beauty supply store. You know what I mean? Like, they just went on there and they're like, yeah, dope. Like, let's take a picture real quick. And it was like 3 frames and then we carried on, So I don't even remember your question, Ray. I'm so sorry. But that was like the expression or experience of like taking this photo. But that kind of translates over to this photo on the right here, because it was like, okay, commission portrait, yada, yada, family situation. And it's like, you look for rhythm and you look for how like bodies kind of come together in a space, but also you have to like sometimes let go of the concept of posing them and just let that come out. And I feel like the rhythm that goes through these 2 images is like some of my favorites here, if that makes sense. The serendipity at this point is coming out because neither one of these shots were necessarily planned. Like I talked about the Chris Lee shoot, this was both just very like what's happening in front of me.
Eley, I wanted to say, like, it's so cool that you zoomed out on that last shot and took that photo like that, because I've done that. I've been in that same situation to where, or for me, what I'm doing is I'm shooting something and it's on a backdrop and I'm thinking like, it's maybe different than what you're doing, but like what the client wants, like this tight shot, like I'm just like so focused on it. And then I'll zoom out and take like 2 photos and then zoom back in. And then the one zoomed out is like the killer, right? It's like you can see everything. It's such a better vibe. It really does encompass what's going on, rather than like, and it's so hard to just break that mental like fixation on, for me, like on what, and I think you're talking a little bit about that, it's like how hard it is to get outside your own head and like, okay, let's shoot this a little bit different, like force yourself to see it differently.
I mean, you're totally right, because like that takes me back to those 4 photos over like 4 years where it's like the exact same shot, you know what I mean, somehow.
Yeah.
But it's like I just have this thing like stuck in my brain of like, this is a portrait. And sometimes you have to like rattle yourself and then go like, oh yeah, you can do whatever you want, you know what I mean? Like you can express a portrait in multiple different ways, even if it's just zooming out a little bit.
Yeah, I have like fought myself on shoots, and been like, no, don't do that. That's stupid. No, no, and it's crazy, like the mental games that we play with ourselves.
When I look at this one, this is like an example of how I am looking at, again, those kind of base components of like, I don't know, art school, I don't know, line, shape, and form kind of scenarios where it's like, okay, like the outlines were coming out for me. Like this person's characteristics are unique in this capacity. So this is for me, like kind of breaking the traditional scope of how I shoot portraiture. And I love this because when I put like documentary versus studio portraiture together, it's like, oh, I see that I like outlines. I like the silhouette component. I like what stories you might be able to create between the peaches in the background, Oklahoma, and the mask, or like the tattoos on his body and the way he's got scars on his faces and those types of things. So for me, this is just a quick expression of like trying to take a moment and just look at what it is I find fascinating in a moment and then being able to record it.
Do you ever
Go
get
ahead.
do you ever get tired of photographing people and want to do something like completely that you've never done before, like sports, or I don't know that you haven't
No.
done sports, but no, never.
I love
How can you get bored of photographing people? Yeah, every person is so unique, right?
Yeah, like seriously, I mean, I'm not gonna like knock the opportunities that I have to, photograph alcohol or photograph shoes or whatever the case is. But one, I love to be able to say like move and it moves and not have to have a stylist come in to move it. You know what I mean? And then two, there's just, I don't know. I love that one-on-one ability to connect with somebody and to like, it's a little bit of therapy. I've always kind of said, like being a portrait
Yeah.
artist, because I feel like you really are getting them to bring down their walls or break through barriers from time to time. If you can get that to happen, like you're winning. You know what I mean? So
It's therapy for you or therapy for them?
I would say like it starts with therapy for them, but it might be a little therapy.
Definitely, yeah. I feel the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, so I do love it. I mean, I feel very connected when I can do a intimate portrait session.
Yeah, you can really learn a lot about yourself through spending time with people and photographing them. Because I find that if you want someone to open up, if to you and let down a little bit of their wall, the only way you can do that is by doing that yourself. Show some vulnerability, share something, and a lot of times that is good for you as well,
Yes.
in a selfish way. So this I'm really excited to click on this next picture because this series is like so conceptual and dynamic, and different from what we've seen, yet still like that same vibrancy, that energy and that power. This was a personal project, right?
No, this
No,
was
okay.
for a brand called Wolf and Son, and they're the thongs and the briefs that you'll see. It's just undergarments. And they're an Australian-based company. And when I was traveling to Australia like a couple of years ago, this company just happened to start following me, and I was like, "Oh, that seems cool," and made a connection with them. And I was like, "Hey, I'm actually coming to Australia. Would you like to do some work together?" And they were like, "Well, we have this new line, and we like your eye, yada yada, but we need to kind of work on a rebrand to a certain capacity." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool. Tell me more about that." Fast forward, the shoot didn't happen there because the garments couldn't get there on time from Melbourne to where I was in Sydney. So they shipped them here to Atlanta. And then I had the opportunity to kind of build this shoot based off of like what was missing in their brand and based off of like what my heartbeat was. And for me, I was an athlete, I was a volleyball player. So I know volleyball really well as far as like, the storytelling in it of like, you set up the spike, you get the game point, you have the big hoorah at the end, that type of thing. And so like, if you go to the next page, you'll kind of see a couple more of those moments where it's going from you know, the serve over to like the big hoorah in the end where they win the game point. But the most important part of this was more so me being able to say, well, let's look at what's in your brand and what's missing. And what was missing there is that they didn't want to do a Victoria's Secret thing again. They wanted to showcase strong women, but all of their women were like white. So they were like, we need to kind of figure out how to round this out. And I was like, well, let's bring in some color. And I was able to showcase Black strong bodies in a strong sport, which I really loved and appreciated. So like, you know, the sports bras are obviously not a part of it, but it was about making this costume to be a part of this like volleyball series. So I shot them in studio, and I wanted it to have like a very like sports illustrated kind of lighting component to it, but it was for a fashion story. So we shot it in that sports lighting, and then I went out to Piedmont Park, shot the different volleyball courts and things of that capacity, and stitched them all together in Photoshop. But for me, it was just really cool to be able to say, okay, this brand trusts my like mood board again to say like, this is where she wants to go. This is the theory behind it. These are the elements that are missing, how she dissected our website, and they gave me the green light and said, okay, cool.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And so like, for me, this is an expression of how like the conceptual side carries over into the commercial world for me. Whereas if you go to the next slide, it showcases a bit more of like my personal work, like even more of like my, like the heart of my personal work, which is always some level of social political conversation. And so for me at the time, this is a 2 of like 6 in the series. I was like listening to the Dailies podcast, and it was like a really cool special that just had all these interesting things that were kind of recalling like slavery and just how America has been shifted and like what was happening like state specifically. And for me, I was like, you know what? I need to create. I was inspired by that series. And what I was thinking about was like, who really did help with America's backbone? And so I was like, I'm going to recontextualize these different sculptures that we know from our history books and take them and bring in Black icons, bring in these different icons and these different plantation crops into these pieces to redo what we once idealized, because again, like we were helping with the economy, or like African Americans were helping with the economy. And I feel like the Black woman does not get a lot of representation in our early history books. So you'll see on the left, it's the Statue of Liberty, and she's got tobacco, dried tobacco there. And then on the right, you'll see, this is a Roman warrior statue that I found that I just like was amazed by, that I did again with sugarcane. And then the third piece to this series has cotton in it, and it's Lady Justice. So yeah, so
these are phenomenal. Like the way that you've constructed a story and constructed a narrative, you know, within a beautiful photograph is like super impressive. I mean, yeah, these are incredible.
Yeah, these are amazing, Eley. Yeah, the technical aspects of it to the storytelling. I mean, all of it is just incredible. And we've got thank you for that, Billy. We've got a question from Matthew Rond, again, longtime friend of us, of the Photo Night. Your energy for the work is infectious. What keeps you excited in photography, in the business at the moment, and what are you photographing tomorrow?
Good question.
Let's unpack that. What keeps me energetic? I don't know. I am like pretty pumped. I'm not gonna lie. I'm like trying not to like fist pump right now. But it's an opportunity to like be connected to these people and to have people trust me in the process. You know what I mean? Like these are professional models, and I was like, I want to do this like conceptual thing with you that's not going to be you like being necessarily like traditionally beautiful for your portfolio. Trust me, I promise. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so to be able to have that trust makes me excited to say I'm going to go out and continue to create. The second part of your question was, what am I doing tomorrow? I don't know. What day is it? My birthday's this weekend. I'm going to relax. But outside
take a Friday off.
Right. But outside of that, I'm gearing up for a few new personal projects, which I can't tell you too much about yet. But I found it, I was really drained like a couple of weeks ago, to be honest. And I took a personal trip out to Colorado, and that just allowed me to get away from Atlanta, to sit on a mountaintop, to like namaste and do that whole dance and just like look at nature, see new colors, find inspiration in a different space than the city and come back with that and say like, okay, cool. Like I'm pumped again to like go and create something fresh and like look at my book in a different way and like understand my new trajectory of like what I want to do like 5 to 10 years out of the way, which is like actually like mind blowing for me to say right now, because I've always been like, I don't have a 5-year plan. You know what I mean? So like that's huge. So sometimes you just got to step away from what you're doing to be able to figure out what you're gonna do.
Atlanta locals might recognize the place in these pictures. These are all taken in the same place. If you ever drive down Edgewood, or you know who Killer Mike is, or any of that, you can't really mistake their storefront. But tell us about this shoot. Where did it come from? How you approached it?
Yeah, this series is actually very important to me because, again, you know, of course, I'm like working with people and learning their stories and figuring out how to make them feel like the best versions of themselves and all of that. But for me, it was like I was in the walls of SCAD for like 2.5 years or whatever. And people were always asking, like, oh, how's Atlanta? Like, what do you think? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I literally am in this place all day, every day. You know what I mean? Like, I come up to eat and then I go back in. And so when I left SCAD, I was like, okay, I'm in this new city that looks completely different than whatever I experienced in Virginia. So how do I get connected? And so this was my, like, one of my early expressions of like going out onto the Atlanta streets and making like myself push into a door and like taking myself out of my comfort level to learn people different from myself. So I was blessed to be working alongside a really cool videographer at the time. And we decided that we both were on this mission of like, we wanted to elevate the imagery that we saw of African Americans on Edgewood. I don't know if any of you guys know Edgewood, but it's like kind of like a wiry street, wiry energy. But I love that. And so,
Wiry, I like that.
right. And so we had the opportunity to connect with Killer Mike, and he was like, yeah, I've got this swag shop. I've got this thing happening at the stadium that's coming up, and I could use some publicity. And so just another blessing where this dude gave me the green light to say like, you tell me how you want to showcase it. And I honestly think that he thought that I was going to be like, Killer Mike, Killer Mike, Killer Mike. But what I decided once we went in there and sat down with these individual barbers was that like, Killer Mike plays a small part in the swag shop.
Yeah, right. They're the story, right? Yeah.
Killer Mike gave them an opportunity and a space to create, but these are like literally like the heroes of Edgewood. You know what I mean? Like they welcome everybody into the shop. It's like, you know, the traditional concept of a barbershop where it's like, come chop it up, be family, yada, yada. But it's like, they treated me like family, which was really cool because they were very, very different people from myself. And I was a little nervous, but I like went in there with my little notebook and I was like, okay, like I want to make some notes about you and blah, blah, blah. And they were like, girl, like put the notebook down, like let's vibe. And so that was cool because I was able to say like, who are you outside of work and inside of work? And how can I capture that energy? And so for me, it was like, I knew that they, in my mind, were such heroes and so like epic and like TV worthy that I wanted to create that kind of like visual for them. So I wanted it to be environmental, but I wanted it to have like a little bit of a fashion, like crisp, edgy aesthetic to it. And I'm stoked because that bottom right photo for me felt very much like, you know, what you might see on like, I don't know, like some reality TV show or something like that.
Yeah, like a promo. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's obviously like that kind of helped lead me into the trajectory of where I am with the work that I'm creating today in the entertainment industry.
This is the last photo, but I'm most excited to hear about a massive pivot, or shall we say venture, that you've gone into. I mean, it's so perfect for now. We're talking about pandemic, everyone's stressed, everyone's feeling like, what the hell am I doing? What do I do? Tell us, this is super cool. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so today I'm working on like a new expression of my brand, which was like born out of the pandemic and inspired by the creative family around me. I realized that there's so many empathetic souls in this industry, and I feel like we are all, because a majority of us are freelancers, we're all in our own bubbles. So I was like, okay, like we can't see each other right now, we don't know how each other are doing necessarily, and like we can't necessarily create, and those people that are like out on the street at like all the cool like craft fairs and whatnot like aren't having an opportunity to sell their products in some capacity. And I felt like is there a way for me to like put love into a box and deliver that to people's doors? So that's where the Creative Wellness Box came from. And it's interesting because I guess like I have a lesson to maybe, I don't know, share with you guys at the end of this spiel, but this box came from that kind of concept. And I kept looking at other wellness boxes that were doing this, that, or the other, and how their aesthetics were like coming together to make this kind of like very zen experience. But that wasn't working for me. So for me, this box is essential, aspirational, and holistic products from individuals in our community that are creating really cool
Cool.
stuff, like their side
Yeah.
hustles. You know what I mean? So it's like there's bath bombs in there, CBD bath bombs from makeup artists. There's like chocolates from other individuals in the community. There's herbal teas from Brandy off of the Beltline, who's a stylist. You know what I mean? There's all kinds of stuff where it's like, wow, like we've had a moment to just look around and be like, what else do you guys do? Like, what are your side hustles? How are you staying alive? And for me, this is an opportunity to say, take a moment in this 4x6 inch box and like support yourself, throw it in your laptop bag, put it in your camera bag, but go home or take it out whenever you need a little breather for yourself and be like, okay, let me get a reset. Let me use whatever's in this box for this season and make sure that I can continue on with my creative journey. So it was like the concept of delivering a product to the community that gives back to other artists. There's other small businesses, female businesses, and Black-owned businesses up and down the East Coast that are in here. And it's interesting because this has been an evolution for me, because now I'm like this salesperson, which is like uncomfortable for me, like not really what I was trying to do, but here I am. But like I said, I was starting where it was like, oh, the plant photo, or oh, the sage photo, or whatever the case was. And then I was just like, this isn't feeling right. What am I doing wrong? And it was like, okay, turn off Netflix, shut down your computer, and just be with yourself. And what I realized is that it doesn't have to be those things. Like the aesthetics that go with this can be the same expression of like how I approach commercial portraiture, and it can sell this wellness box, you know what I mean? Or be a
Hmm.
to this
Mm-hmm.
wellness box. So it's the reason I'm showing you this is because it's been my own like internal push and pull of like being inspired by something, trying something that didn't work, and then finally feeling like I'm coming into a space where it's like, it's me. It's me being able to express my true expression and being able to share this with the community.